So that's a diffusion or an adoption problem. And that's not a technical phenomenon and not a technical thing to manage. It's actually a social process. If you promise a shortcut, if you just promise something reasonable, no one will listen. That's just a sign of the times. Then if you promise a shortcut, or if you sell urgency, or if you go one level above and you're a bit of a fear-monger, then people will listen. Is to think of yourself with AI as a gaining of intelligence points, right? Because that can go the other way, right? If you need to do this tomorrow, if you don't do this, you lose your job, the fear-mongering and stuff, that can work the other way. There's such a thing as atrophy in your brain muscle, in your creative muscle, in your critical thinking muscle. If you don't exercise it, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Work is changing. That's not a prediction anymore. It's just Tuesday. And the leaders doing it well aren't the ones with all the answers. They're the ones asking better questions. I'm Dave Kenyon, and this is Evolving Workforce. Today we're talking about something that sits underneath almost every conversation about AI right now, and that's strategy. Not the kind that looks good in a boardroom, but the kind that actually holds up when it meets real teams, real systems, real work. Because while a lot of organisations feel like they're making progress with AI, many are finding that the real challenge starts when strategy meets the workforce, when roles, accountability, and day-to-day decisions actually have to change. My guest is Dirk J Primus, Associate Professor at UNSW, specialising in strategy, innovation and technology. Dirk works closely with organisations on how strategies translate into execution and where it tends to break down. Dirk, great to have you on Evolving Workforce.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you on. So tell me, from your perspective, what's actually changing in terms of the way organisations are increasingly embedding AI?
Yeah, I think the way you're asking this first question already clarifies something in my mind. What kind of strategy flavors we're talking about, and probably today we're going to talk about adoption in the organization for the most part, and not necessarily building new products based with strategy. Am I on the right path there?
You're on the right path.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So what am I seeing? Well, I'm seeing, first of all, when you look at all the organizations, and most of my information, I should say that where that comes from, a lot of my information actually comes from my students directly, because I teach part-time MBA students, and a lot of them are at a fairly high level in their organization, so they have a pretty good visibility of what's happening, when it's happening, why it's happening, and when it goes wrong. So a lot of that information comes from there, and then obviously from my communities, innovation practitioners and so on and so forth. And what I'm seeing, and this is true for everything that I'm going to say today, this is just my view. I'm not claiming to be the guru or the prophet on the hill here. What I'm seeing is that there's really a big range of what's going on. So you see organizations that are really fighting and struggling to get anything going. And then you see organizations that are finding it fairly easy to get something going, and finding it fairly easy to absorb, the technological possibilities that come with AI, and anything in between also. And there's also a range of reasons for why it happens in some cases and why it doesn't. And here's, not to add more complexity, but even within the same fabric, even within the same organizations, you see pockets where, in some organizational units, it might, be very fluid, almost like no energy input, and everything kind of falls into place almost automatically. And then in other, organizational units, in other pockets, you have way more hurdles, way more resistance, and things going on. So I see the whole spectrum.
Does any particular industry stand out to you that are more resistant?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think it's industry may be a good direction. That's a very good thought. Maybe go one level narrower or down, application-based. It really depends on, where we're using AI, or where AI is helping us to do a job faster, to do it better, to do it more thoroughly, and so on and so forth. So, and the cases are out there. You can actually hear about them. So places where there's like really sophisticated adoption already, at least at the experimental level, is like medicine.
Yeah.
You see, we've all probably seen a program on TV where you see the radiology doctor trying to, not as the final diagnostic entity on the chain of decision making, and also like recommending a therapy or recommending a remedy or something like that for a patient, but also let's say there's a tired doctor like looking at 500 X-rays a day. I don't know if that number is even realistic, but I'm just exaggerating on purpose. Then maybe AI can help you to not overlook that little fracture or that little hair kind of fracture in an arm or in a critical place. So something like that. And it's obvious that these people are embracing it because it helps everybody and there's no resistance. So then if you go drastically to the other end in sophistication level, I think most organizations have like a lot of people, maybe the majority of people that use the chat GPTs of this world, the co-pilots, and maybe Anthropic, the Claudes and so on and so forth. And you would see, them using it as a glorified autocomplete to write an email or as a glorified search engine and stuff. And that's also quite obvious and stuff. When it gets into, hey, I have to put my signature underneath a workflow and a work product, and it has maybe even legal ramifications, or it has ramifications downstream in the work process. So I'm setting someone else up to do something wrong, or so. Then you begin to see a little more hesitance and stuff. Am I going in the right?
Yeah, you are.
In the right direction.
You are going in the right direction. This is great.
Yeah.
And so when you look at workforce specifically in terms of the systems in workforces, the leaders, how they're approaching it, how people are being organised, the leadership, the teams. Yeah. What's starting to shift in terms of roles, accountability, and decision making?
That's a very good question. So we're kind of, in my mind, what we're doing is we're shifting from the end user of AI, if you wish, to sort of the people deploying it. Like where does it go, who uses it, when, and when do they not use it? Sort of, I think in your initial email to me, you described that as sort of middle management and the leadership of the organization. And there's certainly, you need to kind of reimagine how you live your day at work if you're in that layer and stuff, right? The easiest way, and I always try to visualize it for my students and stuff, and the easiest way I can wrap my head around it, I think of the organization as sort of a cake, and bear with me, I know it sounds a bit weird and maybe too simplified, but at the technical level, once you think AI, you think digital, you think IT, and IT is responsible for the piping, but the piping also has to go somewhere because someone says it has to go there and stuff. So then you need to think of layers, and I don't want to get too technical, but there's systems of record, there's systems of engagement, and so on and so forth. I don't know if you're familiar with these terms.
Yes.
And I think now when we get to sort of deep absorption, adoption, and possibly assimilation of AI, a middle manager needs to have at least sort of the basic vocabulary and also the skill set and the understanding of consequences of what changes when I make changes to the layers of the cake. And then the other thing is that if you allow me to speak in cake language,
please.
Are you getting hungry yet?
I love a cake.
Love it. Yeah, I love a good cake too.
Are we talking chocolate cake right now?
We are talking multi-layered cake.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So there's reasons to connect the layers. And that's what most people think about. But there's also very good managerial reasons, not IT reasons, to separate the layers, right? Sometimes, like if you allow me to stay in the kind of pastry realm and stuff, a good cake sometimes lives with the separation of layers, right? So you want to keep certain things separate and not consume everything at the same time. And then you can think of that as also in terms of slices. And a lot of things happen or don't happen because the slices don't operate together. You, in your introductory email, talked about, sometimes we call them silos, right?
Yes.
So if there's too much separation between the slices of the organization and stuff. So for example, if you have an intention to have an agentic workflow that goes from procurement all the way to maybe logistics and so on and so forth, again, you need the piping and you need the workflows that ties the two of them together. So that's what I'm saying, going across the cake sort of is important. And the middle management and up, in my view, should have a good understanding of sort of architecture. This is what I call it, right? The architecture of the whole system. So a good systems thinker that understands what happens here when I do this there. Like the kind of ripple effects and disconnects and connects in the system and across the layers and an understanding. So be a good architect and be a good orchestrator, across those layers and slices of the cake.
I think most people can relate to, when ChatGPT first came out, 3 years ago, people were using it in their own time. They increasingly used it more for work, and then businesses, and then we got Copilot, and then we got Claude, and now organisations are going, hang on, we should all be using the one instance so that we can learn from each other and have it all on one platform.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, I'm sure there's the silos or the pieces of cake where people are using all different kinds of AI, and they're not necessarily helping or having a synergistic effect
Mm-hmm.
on the whole organisation. And I think that's something that we can certainly very much relate to.
Yeah.
Are you finding that now people are going, hang on, let's try and bring all this together in one organisation, or is it still very siloed?
I think if I would go back and say like this is like a homogeneous kind of symptom, or then I would be negating what I said at the beginning when I said I see the whole range even across a lot of organizations. So in fact, the most organizations that I see, and other people may see differently, is that there are pockets that work really well, and then there's pockets that that are struggling and stuff. That's the most common kind of picture that I see.
Sure.
Yeah.
And when we zoom into workforce, I think a lot of leaders are really starting to cotton on to that. You've seen a lot of AI strategies. Why do most of them fail once they hit real teams?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on how you define failure. Where does this whole thing break down, if you wish? And you could define failure by, saying, okay, just deploying 1,000 Copilot licenses means nothing unless someone actually makes use of them. So you have the 1,000 licenses, everybody signs up for them, everybody goes on once and then never uses the tool. That to me would be the whole thing breaking down. Are we thinking alike? Okay,
yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's a diffusion or an adoption problem, and that's not a technical phenomenon and not a technical thing to manage. It's actually a social process. At least that's how I see the world.
Yeah, or it might even be that, okay, we've got an aim to, I don't know, hit some sort of productivity goal or hit a goal, and it just doesn't work at all. Have you seen that?
Yeah, and it's most of the time it's not because the technological part is not capable to deliver in theory what the end goal is, but it is also the interaction between the human and the technology. That's the most common culprit. And again, I'm not saying, okay, the humans shape up, you're not good enough or so. There's other reasons behind it for why they're not interacting with the technology in the way they should. And there's a myriad of reasons that are also different in different organizations. In some cases, maybe the environment or the UX or the UI is just wrong. Right? It's a simple thing. That's not the user's fault, and it's not the core technology's fault. It's the whatever connects them. Going back to the cake,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the disconnect could be that. Is there any other disconnects in terms of what leaders expect to happen and what the workforce actually does?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you've. I might not make myself very popular, but if you've heard the word AI theater, have you?
No.
No.
Please
So
help me out. Educate me.
It's the direct descendant of the word innovation theater, it's basically that at some layers there's a possibility or a likelihood that conversations about AI at the boardroom level and maybe even the middle management kind of level become very performative, right? So that's the idea behind this. So I go to a meeting, I go to the next meeting, and as long as I throw out the word AI and engine and license and deployment and stuff 5 times, I'm good. I get to go home, I keep my paycheck and stuff. But not putting the finger of blame on anybody, but it's also really hard for some people to follow up and make people accountable for actual results. Actual traction in that sense. So. Yeah, you see that quite a lot. That there's maybe good intentions, and then another if you allow me to talk about that, a lot of good intentions and a lot of energy can be it's wasted because in this day and age, like there's it's similar to a gold rush, right? There's people trying to make a buck here.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be very careful with my wording, so I'm not offending too many people. But like in Klondike 150 years ago, so you have people that literally sell you shortcuts because that makes their message cut through the noise, right? If you promise a shortcut, if you just promise something reasonable, no one will listen. That's just a sign of the times. Then if you promise a shortcut, or if you sell urgency, or if you go one level above and you're a bit of a fear-monger, then people will listen. And to no fault of the people. I mean, like, they just want to be heard and they want to make a buck, And unfortunately, that has become a bit of the message that, like, created urgency and a little bit of, self-created fear. And then also the promising of shortcuts is more attractive than a long-winded kind of project, because everybody is looking to make, quick strides and long strides and stuff. And that's not necessarily healthy for that.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, no, that does. That does. I wasn't familiar with the Klondike terminology, but
that's my own thinking. I mean, I did some research, and because there's like similar eras in history, right?
Yeah.
And the gold rush was like, everybody was trying to get to the gold, and the AI era has similar traits, right? Everybody's trying to get to. There's a lot of funding, there's a lot of investments going in that direction, and everybody's trying to make a buck for sure. And even then, and if you go back to the Klondike, the gold rush era and stuff, you find the craziest things, like people selling shortcuts, like magical kind of devices and contraptions that make you find gold quicker, easier, basically shortcuts, and very, very similar, very, very analogous to what you see out there in the field, like people trying to sell shortcuts in AI to success. Basically.
That makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
And that word shortcut is actually, what is AI in at the start of it. People will go, oh well, I can pump out 50 blogs today.
Yeah.
I can write 50 customer emails, and from a marketing perspective, it seems very attractive. But are you really hitting the mark there, and have you got context and all that sort of stuff? So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of when AI gets introduced, what breaks first, the roles, the processes, or accountability? Have you seen just people being, and I think you've already touched on this, just not accountable? And one thing, I'll just add to this question, we probably should touch on your background and what the work that you do at UNSW.
Yeah. So at UNSW, I'm mostly active at the AGSM, if you're familiar with that. So the Australian Graduate School of Management, shout out here. Everybody pay attention to us.
Go ahead.
Because we're doing great things. And I'm responsible for a digital suite of courses. So we have 4 courses in that suite.
Yep.
And broadly, they, all of them incorporate AI, digital AI these days. It wouldn't make sense otherwise. One of them is focused on the innovation part of the life cycle. Of a product or an organizational unit.
Sure.
The other one is about the digital enterprise and AI. And then there's one about digital transformation, and then we have one that is purely dedicated to AI strategy. So those are the 4 courses, and I'm overseeing them. Have talented teachers that I work with, and we coordinate, we collaborate, and have a big challenge keeping those up to date in a very fast evolving field. Have a very talented pool of students, very curious, high energy. That's the benefit. It's probably a little easier to excite our students about AI than it is about accounting at the moment, and so we're fortunate in that way. We get a lot of energy in the classroom and a lot of curiosity in the classroom. So, but that's what I do at AGSM.
Well, this episode and this season too is really around that AI strategy, workforce management, workforces, and there is a lot of excitement in terms of what's going on right now, and that piece, we've had some interesting guests on in terms of cybersecurity, AI cybersecurity, and AI strategy. In terms of in that part of it, so I'll just move to our next section, which is we like to play a few games. One of them is called Humans versus AI.
Sure.
So in a workforce context, what should humans always own, and what can organisations safely rely on AI?
Yeah, the best way for me to frame this is and this is what I tell my students and people that I work with in like practitioners, is to think of yourself with AI as a gaining of intelligence points, right? You're basically, by combining a human with an engine, the goal is, and we're talking about this like at the one-on-one level.
Sure.
For now,
Yeah.
okay. So the goal is to gain intelligence points. The way to think of this that is not so beneficial is if you gain your intelligence points by putting the AI gain on top of your intelligence points. So in other words, if you give the AI the work that your higher thinking should be doing. My best advice, and this is just me, to my students and to my, the clients that I work with and people that I work with in industry is put yourself on, like put AI underneath and gain your intelligence points by sort of stepping on a box, and reaching higher levels by keeping the higher order thinking to yourself and outsource or delegate to AI the stuff, that is inconvenient if you wish. And that just consumes a lot of time. And, search, compilation of stuff. Like if you think of a lawyer is writing a motion in limine for a case or something like that, has to say like, okay, I want to bound the evidence here, there, and there. And then, the lawyer has to go out and write something to a judge, right? Because they want it limited for the case. And they go into databases, and to do that credibly and in a way that the judge can actually approve it, they need to cite 200 cases. They need to cite case law. Now, that's not a good, allocation of their time, but it still needs to be very thorough, and it still needs to be, it needs to be, you need to cast a wide net, and, it's very difficult to frame that in a database where you just have keywords and stuff. It's an ideal application for a lawyer to save like 5 hours of their time. They're not learning anything. You don't really need the lawyer. It's just literally like painting walls. Like more square feet or so will require more time of work. So that's an ideal case or an ideal example that I can offer to explain how I see gaining intelligence points. That way the lawyer has way more capacity to think about trial strategy, or has time to talk to their client, or has time to think about how they're going to frame something, or or how they're going to time something in the trial. Just one example.
Yeah, I really like that. Really rings true to me, the way you said keep the higher thinking, that critical thinking to yourself, and then just use the AI for the repetitive stuff, for the stuff that is the grunt work, really. Yeah.
And that doesn't relegate the work to something that is useless or something, or that, it's just stuff that takes a human a long, long time, and it occupies the mind for no good reason for a long, long time, because it's simply the scale of things that the mind has to deal with.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Now, what in next game is called Change Your Mind. What's something you've changed your mind about in terms of the way organisations to prepare their workforce for AI?
Oh God, it happens every day right now. It's like it's very. I think that's one thing you have to kind of a trait that you have to retain for yourself, that you keep an open mind in the next couple of months, next couple of years and stuff, and that you don't nail yourself down to being too hard-headed about this is the path I'm going down. I think, and not be apologetic about it. I mean, like that's what really good thinkers really do. At least that's how I think about good or healthy thinking people. Is that if you've done something wrong, you just scrap it, chuck it, and you go another direction. Like, so adaptive kind of thinking, adaptive being adaptive I think is a good trait to have and stuff. So first of all, I'm ready to change my mind every single day, every single hour if I need to be, and I'm also ready to be surprised every hour and stuff. But there's some principles I will not abandon. And a lot of them, they're obvious, like ethical, moral principles and stuff. So there's hard lines that I do not recommend. I will not ever recommend someone to cross. So, and AI has brought a lot of those discussions about, you probably talked in those past podcasts about the issue of manipulation.
Yeah.
Right. Then I think I also will never change my mind on the fact that we need to be very careful, cognizant, and responsible in terms of limiting the environmental externalities of AI usage, and that it stems mostly from data centers and that explosion of data consumption and data harvesting and data fencing. Also, everybody's trying to data is the new oil, that famous adage and stuff from 20 years ago that somehow got forgotten but researched recently. So data is the new oil, but that has immense kind of ramifications for the environment and stuff, and the externalities, the environmental externalities of AI and stuff. Those are things that I will not be prepared to move on, and the moral boundaries and stuff. But everything else, the technical, I'm ready to change my mind every single day.
I want to dig in a couple of things there. You mentioned manipulation. If you could explain that one and the externalities of AI.
Yeah. So let's talk first about the moral part, like the manipulation. The way we talk about it in my courses and the way I talk to practitioners, if they want to hear my opinion about it, is by setting the tone that not all manipulation is necessarily bad. It sounds like a bad word, and we usually, when you mention it in a conversation to a human, there's immediately kind of a negative kind of flavor to it. But not all of it, right? So all of us who are parents, I'm a parent. Are you a parent?
Not that I know of.
Not okay. Well, a lot of the listeners will be parents.
I'll just answer that again. No.
No. Okay. So a lot of the listeners might be parents and stuff, and I challenge them. I said, you have positively manipulated your child.
Yes.
Right? And there's nothing unethical or something like that. Sometimes you just need to coax them a little bit and stuff. There's no bad intention. So. And then the idea about when does manipulation become bad, that needs to be treated very carefully. Obviously, when are you going too far, right?
So you're talking about Dirk, where AI is manipulating my thinking.
Correct. And so there's these cases out there, and they're also very hot in the news, like. I don't want to mention a brand because I don't want to be sued after this podcast and stuff. But there's like AI companionship.
Yes.
You've heard of this.
Of course.
And there are cases, and everybody who will listen to this podcast can research that, and then you will see who I'm talking about. It's very easy, very loud out there. Some of them are being rightfully so challenged because there's very strong evidence that they're manipulating their users and stuff. And it begins with the simple kind of stuff like the sycophant kind of interpretation of the model, like basically making the user stay engaged as long as possible. Then you can ask yourself, is that actually ethical? To keep someone sucked to the screen and and having be engaged, and then always being agreeable and so on and so forth. And it goes as far as there's some suspicion at least that it may have that companion models may have contributed to stuff like suicide and self-harm, and that's where this is really sad. That should never ever happen, and that stuff needs kind of boundaries for sure, right?
Yeah.
If you wish that there's other directions, like should AI manipulate purchase decisions? Should how you allocate your personal funds? That's unethical. Should AI be in a position where you kind of silently in the background somehow subversely kind of are being manipulated to do something that is harmful to anything in the environment, any living thing or so? And we can go down the route there, but that there needs to be very And it can't always be like through regulation. You can't write everything down. Like people need to be educated about it, and maybe on the skeptical side is safer, especially when you interact with companions and things like engines that might have an agenda. I think Harari gives us good guidance there in the book. You know Yuval Harari, right?
So I don't.
Yeah, but author, historian actually, but talks about AI a lot. Says like, when you get advice and it sounds a bit fishy and stuff, ask yourself, whose privileges are being served if I do what I'm being suggested to do here? Is this really helping myself, my family, my community, or is this really serving someone else's privileges? So these are kind of really good tests, and if something smells a bit weird, then if it doesn't pass the smell test, then maybe it's time to take a break and say time out here. We could talk hours about manipulation and the ethical ramifications, especially of AI companions there. But you also wanted to talk about the environmental,
Sure.
Externalities, as we call them in technology management of AI. If you run the numbers, and I don't know if you have, but the data centers, and you need data for AI, right? That's the underpinning and stuff. They are incredibly power hungry, and it comes with water consumption. It comes with a lot of energy consumption. And there's debates out there. People talk about this. Should we? Right now, in many organizations, everybody can go on Copilot and just fire out, I want a recipe for spaghetti bolognese tonight. And is that a good? That consumes a certain packet of energy right now. Should that even be happening? Because if one person does it, so what? But if we're incredibly wasteful, and like 1 billion people do it once this technology has been diffused and stuff, that's kind of really nonsensical. Like to waste that much water, cooling water, to waste that much energy just because a couple of people are too lazy to kind of remember how they made their sauce, last week or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that discussion about the data centers is going to get bigger and bigger here in Australia, but obviously across the world. I saw a report that they're going to build around 200 here in Australia, more than what's already here. And I think that's a discussion that will keep going.
And at the same time, responsible use, even in an organization, if I've completed a task like 3 times and AI has helped me the first time, and the second time I don't quite remember, and I ask the engine again to help me, and the third time, but then in the fourth time or the fifth time, I just do it because I can. That's where kind of people should think about, where does responsibility begin and where does convenience. Where should convenience end? And it's just as one example. I know I'm a bit hyperbolic with Googling your dinner plans and stuff, but or searching for or getting help with your dinner plans, but that's sort of like a worst case, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure we've all done what time's the train, or anything like that seems quite frivolous. Now the next one is a prediction and a warning. So one prediction that you can see how AI is going to reshape the workforce in the next, say, 2 years even.
Honestly, I think that, most thought leaders that I respect in this area remind us to be humble about things, and not, if I would cast out the big prophecies and stuff, I probably would be joining the snake oil people right now. I don't feel comfortable like making that big prophecy. And I don't think I'm equipped to do it, and I don't think anybody is, to make that big 3 to 5 year prophecy. I think one of the questions, there's a few junctures that I think where this thing will be decided. And one of the big junctures that I see is if you think of how Apple actually deploys AI. So do you have an iPhone or do you have a Samsung? So you have noticed that Apple is very capable of deploying AI in their products, but but they've been true, and this is what I mean, like being true to your principles, the design principles for how human-computer interaction happens. Apple never lost or left that path, right? It's if you have your iPhone, it's very backgroundy.
Yeah,
you don't have direct ChatGPT like or Anthropic type interaction and stuff, but everything kind of seeps. It runs there quietly in the background and does its thing. And if we go down that route, and I think that might be a healthy route where, you don't need a retrained workforce, but if we just get better at deploying it in the Apple kind of way, I'm not an Apple worshiper or in that sense, I do have an iPhone, but that doesn't mean I'm not paid by Apple or something like that. But that may be a healthy path. And then there may be the other path, where it's in your face all the time, and where you literally need to prompt all the time, where you literally need to oversee agents and pump out things. I don't know, but this is one of the junctures that will depend on where this whole thing goes and where the working person will need to orient themselves to.
So, Dirk, what you're really saying is that every application that we're using right now could go the Apple route, where it's just quietly ticking by, and we're noticing leaps and bounds in terms of things we can do, but it's we're just clicking through the same application.
Correct. It will just seep into the background, right?
Yeah, just magically do so much more.
Correct.
Versus, now you're using AI and it looks like a prompt and it looks like ChatGPT over the top of our existing application.
Yeah.
I think you're right in that it will just go into the background. There will be some applications where it does look more AI, but I kind of agree with you there. Yeah.
So substance over form division, for example. So like right now, I love like PowerPoint slides with visuals and stuff. So I used to obsess over my graphs and my, my charts and my flow charts and so on and so forth. Nowadays, I can, with Claude, workflow support and stuff, I can just type like really ugly stuff into PowerPoint. I press a button, say like, make this neat.
Yeah.
Then it's still my intellectual work product and stuff, but I don't spend like 3 hours over making that square this wide or yay high and fixing the proportions and stuff. So it could go that route.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yep.
And one warning for the way AI is embedded in the workforce.
I think I already kind of put a few in there, right, in our conversation. But if I can just maybe for the middle management or top layer, as you invoked it earlier in the conversation, be careful who's urging you, be careful who's with people inducing fear and a sense of urgency where it's not warranted, because that can go the other way, right? If people, you need to do this tomorrow, if you don't do this, you lose your job, the fear-mongering and stuff, that can work the other way. You're actually giving AI a bad name that it doesn't necessarily deserve because of that. So be careful with the shortcuts, So very consistent with what I said earlier. And for the user and stuff, really, I hope that people use it responsibly and not in a theater, not in a performative way, and telling other people how they use it responsibly. But when they think of, what did you say? Like Googling when using ChatGPT to ask when the bus leaves and stuff. Maybe not. Don't do that. Like very simple stuff, and think about the environmental externalities, and also think about how much of your intellectual independence you're willing to outsource, for your own sake and stuff. So that's a bunch of warnings. So, yeah.
I love that. Your intellectual independence. Keep that brain thinking.
Yeah.
Don't outsource your brain.
It's a muscle, There's such a thing as atrophy in your brain muscle, in your creative muscle, in your critical thinking muscle. If you don't exercise it, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Oh, I totally agree. Now, Dirk, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. For leaders listening to this podcast, what is something that we haven't covered today that you think is critical in terms of the way we're using AI, we're implementing it, and how it's going to reshape the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, we have covered a lot of ground, I think, today, which is fun. So thank you, first of all, for making this fun. I think where we could spend another few hours on the topics are, how should people prepare themselves for this new era in terms of, how should they work their muscles and how should they train their muscles? Are there ways to be a better systems thinker? Are there ways to be a creative thinker? Are there better ways to be a philosopher. There's this new MIT, or maybe not so new anymore already, MIT paper, Philosophy Eats AI, how to think like a philosopher when you interact with AI and stuff. We could have talked about that, but that's an endless kind of topic. Yeah.
No, I love all those topics.
Yeah.
And keeping yourself, keeping your creative, your philosophical brain going is a really good message.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for joining us on Evolving Workforce.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much
Dirk.
for having me. This was fun. Thank you.
See you
This
later.
was fun.
Bye.
Thank you. Later.
See you
Bye.
later. Bye.
Later. Bye.
Evolving Workforce was proudly brought to you by OHI, specialists in workforce management, award interpretation and payroll compliance, delivering new certainty. This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people. If you enjoyed this podcast, why not send to a friend or a colleague? And remember to hit follow on your podcast player to get every episode as they drop every Wednesday. Thanks for listening. I've been Dave Kenyon, and this is Evolving Workforce.